a lot of people are writing about how this is really a supply problem, that there aren't good senior women for senior leadership roles or for board roles. And I challenge that. I don't think it's a supply problem. I do think it's a demand problem. And as soon as the demand parameters can be expanded, I think you'll be overwhelmed with the supply of great women for senior leadership and board roles.
The biggest challenge to increasing the number of women on boards and senior leadership positions is the pipeline. So I'll talk senior leadership positions first. If you don't have a thorough enough process of talent management to get down into the organization and look at diversity at 3, 4, 5 levels below the C-suite, then the ultimacy of you having more women or more people of color in senior management ranks is going to be minimized. So you have to be able to manage the pipelines at lower levels in the organization. That's one thing. The other challenge is that, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, you have to be intentional. This can't be something that you hope will happen. So it has to be embedded in the processes, talent management processes, talent review processes, board reviews of succession planning. When you institutionalize it, then these things will take place because you'll be questioned on the merit and the measures as well. Merit alone won't get you there. It has to be measured. And as long as it's measured, as long as you understand the business tie-in, as long as it's embedded in the process, I think you can achieve many things.
Well, I think the greatest challenge in increasing women participating on boards is the fact that we need to do a better job of having bigger numbers at each level because there tends to be just a gradual fall off. And by the time you get to the most senior level of experience and accomplishments, it's just that the percentages are just low. And then you go to fill your board and you just don't have as big of a pool to choose from. And so I think we actually need to look further back in one's career and at further levels and identify why do we get the drop off and what can we do to help women get to a higher percentage at all levels of the company and avoid some of the drop off that we have, unfortunately, across financial services and across companies today.
The challenge for bringing more women along in senior management and on boards, I think, has multiple sources. But if you ask me to just focus on one or two, I think women need more sponsorship. They need men and women who will actively advocate for them. If you're being promoted into a top executive role or if you're being asked to join a board, something has opened the door for you and something is a tiebreaker. And sponsorship can play those roles. So that when you're selecting a new board member, you start with a set of criteria and you might have a dozen people who meet those criteria. When the question comes, who knows somebody on this list? That's where sponsorship and advocacy come in. And I think if there's one thing that women would benefit from greatly, it's more active sponsorship. Now, you only get sponsorship if those people are also willing to have a candid conversation about what the right opportunities are, when they should say no to something and how they should say no, where there are areas in their background that aren't coming through powerfully enough, what it is about their style or their interaction that isn't quite gelling with other people. If you can have a candid conversation with someone who's willing to sponsor you, then I think you've got a winning combination.
So increasing that mental Rolodex so that you can increase the number of women on boards and in senior management is difficult. And one of the things that's most difficult is oftentimes jobs are scoped with either the predecessor in mind. So we want someone exactly like X. And that's going to, by definition, narrow your field of candidates. And in addition, for getting women on boards, oftentimes one of the major parts of the scoping is the requirement that someone has already been on a board. So a board needs to be willing to look for skills and not just the exact past experience of being on a board. There are lots of roles that women have, like being general counsels, being CFOs, head of operating units, that aren't necessarily already have been on a board or haven't necessarily been a CEO, because both of those pools of candidates, the people who've been on the board and the people who've been a former CEO of a public company are pretty gender biased. So if you're just looking to those pools, you're not going to get a good complement of women.
Boards are conscious of the fact that there aren't enough women in boards. I think that has, in many cases, forced them to think more broadly about where they could choose a woman to go on a board. So, for example, they may look to the chief legal counsel or the CFO, not just the CEO, because that broadens the pool to choose from. And I think they've also been more thoughtful about what skills women may have that could fill a board slot, because I don't know of any board that is really happy with where they are. I think everyone wants to do better in this area.
I think we have to recognize that everyone gets comfortable with the way that they operate, and they do what's familiar, they do what's habitual. That's true for men and for women. So when something needs to change, we're talking about two areas of change that have to occur. The skill sets for women as they rise up through their organizations. They have to learn to negotiate in a different way. They have to learn to network in a different way. They have to learn how to project themselves in a way that conveys their leadership to others in a very compelling fashion. But at the same time, we need organizations to be establishing traction for their emerging women leaders. And we need those linked. And too often we're doing one or the other, but not both in an integrated fashion. And I think the task for us is to understand how to integrate the skill building with the organizational initiative so that we can get the leverage from both.